50 years ago, I could not have dreamed of the changes that have now come to the television industry, and now I cannot imagine what the future will bring. What took a whole studio to do 50 years ago, you can now do on your computer and phone from the comfort of your home and with much better quality. So, this is where it all started. GMV6 Shepparton on the 9th of June 1969. GMV6 is a regional television station in Shepparton, 180 kilometres, 112 miles north of Melbourne. When I started, the studio had 2 Marconi cameras, each having 4 fixed lenses used for any live broadcasts or for recording onto one of the 2 2-inch Ampex VTR machines for later playback. I began my career as a studio cameraman, spending my days working on set design, practicing camera moves, and operating a camera for the station's daily live 1-hour children's show, the GMV Junior Club. I also ran camera in the studio to record commercials for local advertisers and for the evening's 10-minute regional news. Incidentally, this is Jason Davis, who I started working with at GMV. I ran into Jason after almost 30 years during one of the presidential campaigns in the US. Jason was then working for KSTP-TV Channel 5 in Minneapolis, St. Paul. He has since retired. In the 4 years I was with GMV6, they had cut back their studio production, so I went on to running the 2 videotape machines and the 2 telecine chains, which transferred motion picture film and slides into video. I also had shifts doing audio and controlling the on-air program. In 1973, I went to RVN2 in Wagga Wagga as a program coordinator. RVN2 is a regional television station in Wagga Wagga, which is halfway between Sydney and Melbourne, and 244 kilometres or 152 miles west of Canberra. While I was in Wagga, they gave me Ballinhal and Bolex 16mm wind-up film cameras to shoot black and white film on, which I then edited for the evening news. After 18 months at RVN2, I moved across to the nation's capital and into CTC Channel 7 Canberra's new colour studios, starting as a videotape operator. Soon after arriving in Canberra, I transitioned to the film department, shooting news and commercials on CP16 and Araflex 16mm film cameras. We had a contract to document construction on the telecommunications tower in Canberra, which gave us a pleasant break from covering politics. In those days, we didn't have occupational and health services to keep us safe, and we didn't have drones to capture great aerial pictures. To capture this video, we were lowered by a crane over the side of the tower in the construction workers' box. It sure beat any amusement park ride. As construction was nearing completion, I had the opportunity of going to the top of the tower. I guess you could say climbing the 195 metres, 640 feet to the top of the tower while carrying a television film camera without a safety harness. This was a pinnacle in my career. And I was on the steps of Parliament House for a reaction to Prime Minister Gough Whitlam's dismissal from office on the 11th of November 1975. In November 1977, I left Canberra for the larger market in Melbourne at HSV Channel 7 as an editor, audio operator. In January 1978, I commenced working for ATV Channel O in Melbourne. 2 years later, the revamped ATV Channel 10 was launched. Management believed that the 10 position on the dial would increase ratings. It was an exciting time to be a cameraman, travelling around the state covering news from helicopters and aeroplanes, and covering some politics and national news. In October 1983, I moved to New York City to open the Network 10 Australia's New York News Bureau. The bureau was on the 22nd floor of the International Building in the Rockefeller Center, overlooking the ice skating rink. From the bureau, we had access to NBC's news feeds through VizNews. We did basic machine-to-machine editing and used the window with views of New York's skyline as a background for live crosses to Australia. We travelled extensively throughout the United States, covering a broad range of issues for the time. From the Democratic Convention in San Francisco, we did news reports on Walter Mondale choosing Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate, making her the first woman nominated for that position by a major party. As the Network 10 had the rights to the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, we spent 4 weeks in LA covering Olympic-related stories and getting to see some events. In Dallas, we reported on President Ronald Reagan and Vice President George H.W. Bush's bid for re-election. I had my first tour of a war zone in 1985, travelling throughout Nicaragua to report on the Sandinista-Contra conflict. I didn't witness any fighting, but we heard a lot of shots being fired and reported on some very nervous and anxious people on both sides of the conflict. We recorded many stories about New York City, including the reopening of the Statue of Liberty for its 100-year anniversary celebration in 1986. And while based in New York, we flew out to the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower to spend 24 hours documenting life on board an aircraft carrier. I first attended the White House on April 17, 1986, when Ronald Reagan was president. He had invited Australia's Prime Minister Bob Hawke to Washington after the United States and Australia cancelled scheduled ANZUS military manoeuvres following New Zealand's refusal to let US ships use their ports. During the time I was based in New York City, I spent a couple of weeks each summer attending the main media workshops, which were the International Film and Video Workshops in Rockport, Maine. I enjoyed working with like-minded people who were learning new skills and brushing up on my know-how. In 1987, I joined Viz News in Washington, D.C. When I commenced, there was only a producer and myself as a cameraman editor. We covered stories in the US and supplied international news material to 400 broadcasters globally. Viz News was one of 2 major independent television news suppliers, the other being Worldwide Television News, WTN. In May 1989, I was chosen to be the World Pool cameraman to document the arrival at the North Pole by an international team that had walked there. I flew out to the pole in a Twin Otter plane, spending 3 hours at the pole filming interviews and showing how the walkers had endured the 56 days travelling across 650 miles of fractured shifting sea ice in temperatures that dipped below minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a balmy minus 7 Fahrenheit while I was there. In 1993, Viz News became Reuters Television. Its operations were absorbed into Reuters' global operations, and the bureau in Washington expanded rapidly. On a typical day at its peak, Reuters Television would employ an extra 5 freelance cameramen to supplement the 5 staff cameramen providing material for the Reuters news feeds and for the 5 in-house television clients.
Stand by, wait, go!
While working for Reuters, I was often subcontracted to their foreign clients to work with them on their stories. TV Tokyo was a Reuters client who I worked for on many occasions. This particular story was about an explosive entry school in Arkansas.
Get down!
I wasn't standing behind the camera for this shot. I took some vacation time while I was with Reuters when I had the opportunity to shoot some film for a pilot for an Australian television program in Los Angeles. We worked closely with Debbie Reynolds, who came along with us to several location shoots. We went into the homes to do interviews with some old-time celebrities such as the comedian Phyllis Diller, Yvonne DiCarlo of the Munsters, Angie Dickinson, who starred as Sergeant Leanne Pepper Anderson in the NBC crime series Policewoman, actor and writer Jackie Collins, Janet Leigh, who played Marion Crane in Alfred Hitchcock's 1960s psychological horror film Psycho, and actress and singer Britt Eklund. I was with Reuters for 17 years as a cameraman editor. In that time, I covered a lot of news stories for Reuters and for their many clients, like the BBC, TV Tokyo, Kuwait TV, Greek TV, and I was the first North American cameraman for Fox News when Reuters had the contract for Fox's launch. For several years while I was with Reuters, I edited on Avid Newscutter and Media Composer for Reuters Business Report. In 1999, I went to Albania and Kosovo to cover the war in Kosovo. I spent 3 weeks mostly documenting the plight of displaced people fleeing the fighting. On the morning of September the 11th, 2001, I was in the Reuters office in Washington, D.C., watching the attacks in New York City unfold on television when we heard that the Pentagon had been attacked. I went to the mall where I could see the White House and the Capitol in case they were to be the next target. As the hijackers of United Airlines Flight 93 were intent on heading to D.C., if they had not been forced to crash the plane into the field in Pennsylvania, there would have been a very different outcome in Washington. In 2004, I left Reuters to go freelance. After working for a variety of clients for several years, I have become a permanent freelancer with NBC. The industry has changed significantly over the past several years, with many companies not wanting to be burdened with permanent staff. NBC has been good to me, giving me a considerable amount of work prior to the 2016 presidential race, and with the unpredictability of the current administration, the workload has increased exponentially. I have had a front row seat to many historical events over the last 50 years. Numerous times I have reported on incidents that until recently I had not been able to save for posterity. I have covered news events on many occasions while being in the company of heads of state and numerous countries' leading politicians, celebrities, queens and kings. I've recorded gruesome murder and horrific accident scenes and some joyous occasions like births, life-saving surgeries, and numerous festive affairs. Until recently, the press has had the public's support in covering the news. Now, members of the press are increasingly coming under criticism and even violence while recording newsworthy events. Well, it's sad to think that I've been able to condense what I think has been a brilliant career over the past 50 years into a little over 10 minutes. Now, with the amount of equipment we require to operate these days, at my age, I appreciate NBC giving me a somewhat less strenuous assignment, maintaining the camera position on the north lawn of the White House.